want to begin with just talking real briefly about the practical experience that I had. Of course, you're familiar with my bio, 3 decades in law enforcement. The vast majority of that time was in drug enforcement at various levels, from working undercover in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area in Maryland back in the late 1970s and early 80s, and eventually moving up through the ranks to where I eventually became a commander of multi-jurisdictional drug task forces, beginning on the western half of the state of Maryland, where I had 7. And then later in my career as a major, I had a total of 13 task forces on the eastern shore, the other half of the state, and where 8 of those were drug task forces. Then went on to become the training commander for the Maryland State Police, and then went to the Baltimore Police Department, where I was commander of training for them, teaching the policies of drug enforcement and other things. And then I went on to my 3rd agency, where I was the commander of the Detective Bureau, still working on drug policy. I must say that I was probably one of the worst prohibitionists to ever walk the state of Maryland. I not only arrested and put people in prison for drug offenses, most of which were for simple possession. By far. Yes, we had our major dealers in those cases in 6 months and 9 months, absolutely. But by far, whether I arrested them or my teams arrested them, eventually ending up being responsible for thousands of arrests. By far, possession. Nonviolent possession of drugs. Gave me a lot of practical experience and insight as to what was going on and the problems associated with that. Unfortunately, I did not see the problems that were brewing. There's a long history with drug laws in this country, but they were really enhanced significantly in 1970 under the administration of Richard Nixon, which is 4 decades ago. But let me point something out. This is what really fascinates me, is that we apparently did not learn from the 1920s in this country with alcohol prohibition. Pretty much the same thing. It was a drug. Alcohol is a drug. And we felt it so important back then to prohibit this substance that the 18th Amendment. I mean, we changed the Constitution of the United States. But it only took my grandparents, your great-grandparents, 13 years to realize that that wasn't a very good thing to do, primarily because it created a very violent society. Yes, we had problems with alcohol use and abuse. We still have it today. We will have it way into the future. But the policies of prohibition just took it to another level. And we have violence all throughout our communities. And it got to a point where kids were being drawn into this business, this underground market, this illicit trade. And mothers were primary in championing for their children back in the 1930s then to have that amendment repealed. And here we are today. We apparently did not learn our lesson, and we're dealing with prohibition again of drugs that people want. Let me say something. I think that Bill and I are really not far. There's not much between us regarding this issue. I think that you'll find that we both agree, as with probably many of you, that drugs, all drugs, this isn't my coffee, but mine's right there, caffeine, but all drugs have the potential for abuse. They do. Illegal, legal ones. And they do. And they can be very problematic, and many times that they are. And you'll find that we probably agree on those issues. But see, this isn't about the drug. This is about the policy. And the more dangerous, the more potentially dangerous a drug can be, the more of a need for regulation and control of that. See, what we've done with prohibition policies, we've just pushed it into the hands of criminal gangs, organized crime, and say, you manage it. You manage it. And that's what we've done with prohibition. So, law school students, we're not here to really argue the rule of law. We're here to argue about the existence of a law, of a policy that shouldn't be in place, in my opinion. You know, what is it really all about? What is law really all about? It's about what's reasonable. What would a reasonable man or woman think? You know, what something that's reasonable, what's just, what's fair? Equally fair, you know, among everyone. Everyone. No one should be omitted from that. So if at the end of this discussion we're going to have here today, you know, if you, let me just say this. If you think that the current laws of policies of prohibition, if you think they're reasonable, you know, if you think they're just, if you think they're right, if you think we're making success after 40 years of this policy, if you think so, then side with Bill, agree with Bill that we should continue down this road of destruction. If not, then become a part, I mean, you're law students, become a part of change. Become a part of doing good things for people. Now, I was once told, I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, I spent a lot of time in the capital of Maryland, Annapolis, Maryland, talking and working with legislators, and this one senior legislator told me once, he said, you know, he says, no bill is by far 100 times better than a bad bill any day. So for those of you that go into politics and you're now into writing bills and crafting bills to be passed, just remember that. Remember that. So what has prohibition cost us? What has 40 years of prohibition cost us, our society? Let's talk about it together. Financially, it has cost us, this country in the U.S., $1.3 trillion. However, globally, organized crime generates every year, it's estimated, no one knows exactly, but somewhere between $300 and $500 billion every year. We have banks that launder that money. Wachovia Bank was just, well, fine, not enough, but you see what I'm talking. There's a lot of money being made by criminal organizations, tax-free. But it has cost us, the citizens, a lot of money over the past 40 years. Incarceration, it's cost us people, good people. Don't get me wrong. There's a place for bad people. There's a place for people who hurt other people. But as I said at the beginning, most of the people I'm responsible for going to jail were nonviolent drug offenders, possession. Remember that. And look, the United States is 5% of the world's population, but we house almost 25% of its prisoners. And by far, the reason for that is our drug policies of prohibition. Remember, this is the land of the free. In 1970, we arrested, for total drug violations in this country, of all drug offenses, 415,000 people in 1 year. And for all drug crimes. In 2006, that number had grown in 1 year to 1.9 million people just for drug offenses. Here's something that's very interesting. Of that 1.9 million, 43% were from crimes involving marijuana. Big problem here in the islands, right? So they said. Of that 43%, 89%, again, as I said, possession. For possession of marijuana. Not trafficking, no violent crimes, possession of marijuana. What happens when you introduce people to the penal system? What happens when you introduce people to prison for the first time? We know that people cycle in and out, and there's a reason for that. Prisons are not universities. Our gangs were born in prison. When you send people to prison for the first time, don't expect them to return home better citizens. Do you understand what I'm saying? When you go to prison for the first time, you've got choices. You either go into isolation, and that's horrible in and of itself. You get out an hour a day. either go into isolation or you associate yourself with one of these organizations, one of these gangs. And then you have to do things to earn their protection. Even when you get out, you may owe them. Jack Cole, one of our founding members of the organization, says, you know what? You'll get over an addiction. You can beat an addiction, but you'll never get over a conviction. It will follow you in this day and age of technology for the rest of your life. It will shut doors for you, employment doors. If you want a government loan, if any of you make the mistake of getting caught with marijuana and being arrested, there's your government loan for school. Housing issues, and the list is long of the problems it would cause. Thank goodness that none of our presidents, including Obama, Bill Clinton, Bush, and the list is long, never got arrested for weed. They never would have been president. So, okay. Glad someone's keeping time. So I can go on all day on this topic. Believe me, unfortunately, there's a lot to talk about. Okay. So anyway, prisons are not good for you. We should be spending the $35,000 to $50,000 per person we spend a year on putting people in school. We really need to focus our limited resources in this country on education, keeping our young people in school, keeping them out of prison. Because once they're introduced, it becomes a vicious cycle and very few escape. 90% of racial profiling complaints in this country are centered around drug investigation. I know it for a fact. I've been there. Fourth Amendment issues we currently have. Unfortunately, our law enforcement folks violate Fourth Amendment rights of many people across this country. Racial and class disparity is a big problem. Fair and equitable treatment under the law. Let me touch on something here real quick. Rates of incarceration for white men in 2008 in the United States, 943 per 100,000 white men go to prison. I already talked about the overall figures for the country. For 100,000 black men in 2008, that number was 4,919. 4,919. We were upset about apartheid in South Africa in 1993, and they were putting 840-something black males, 846 to 100,000 in prison. Fair and equitable. But here's the reason I'm here. It's about lives. It's about lives. It's about saving lives. Tens of thousands of people every single year perish. Look at Mexico. 4.5 years, over 40,000 murders at the hands of the cartel. See, we can't be selfish, folks, about the United States. We've got to consider our neighbors. Venezuela, that number for the same period of time is over 50,000, and just continue straight on down through South America. Brazil. If I had my slideshow here today, you'd see some ugly pictures of the murders. 2011, for Mexico, the numbers are not. And as I begin to close here, in the United States, the Department of Justice does not accurately track drug prohibition-related homicides. They don't. They omit a lot. So I teamed with a journalist a couple years ago, and the best that we could come up with in our country, in the mainland, and here in Hawaii and Alaska, between 8,000 and 12,000 murders every year are related to drug prohibition laws. Not drug use. Prohibition, the policy. Remember, it's about the policy, and I'll talk a little later about how I became the executive director of this organization and how I am now against prohibition. Unfortunately, it took a tragedy